In this video, I'm going to attempt to build a mobile application from zero and get it into App Store review within one day. I am of course going to use FlutterFlow to do this, and if you've ever watched FlutterFlow tutorials in the past, you might find that a lot of them focus on the UI builder part, and they tend to just ignore the more holistic view of what you actually need to do to get from zero into publishing on the App Store. I've met entrepreneurs who are so deep into the weeds of getting their features working, getting their UI design just right. They were months or even years at times into a project only to find that like push notifications didn't work and the auth flows were incomplete, and they hadn't even started to think about App Store requirements like privacy policy URLs or data protection compliance. What I'm going to build today is a minimum viable product, and this is related to a software engineering practice called agile development, where instead of spending 6 months or a year building an application out from the ground up, an application that might never actually be seen by anyone, we build a small MVP and get it into production immediately so we can start collecting user feedback, often with as little as one feature and a really small but hopefully dedicated user base. From there, you iterate, grow the application at a gradual pace, tweaking it as you follow the feedback you get. The only way I have a prayer of making an app in a day is by relying on a concept called abstraction. In traditional coding, you have frameworks that abstract over programming languages. Flutter is a framework over the Dart language, then FlutterFlow is built on top of Flutter. And I've created an abstraction on top of FlutterFlow that I call the FlutterFlow Starter Kit, which is just a collection of reusable code that I've collected and organized from my past projects. And by the way, if you're looking to do something similar in your own projects, do check out the links in the description for more details. The app that I'm going to build is something for my local community. I live in the Canary Islands in a city called Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. There's a lot of expats and digital nomads come here, especially in the winter. And there's a very active group that organizes on Slack. Slack provides channels so everyone can see the posts that they're interested in. So it could be a channel about yoga or Spanish classes, hiking, jamming, dancing, sports, and so on. But people who don't use Slack at work tend to be a bit confused about it, and Slack isn't really designed for this. So I wanted to create an app that's super simple to use, and since so many people use Instagram already, I thought I'd build something that feels a bit Instagram-y, based around an infinitely scrolling feed of community posts and filtered by tags so that people can opt out of the topics that they're not interested in. And that's the MVP, one feature, a solid foundation from which to iterate. And later I'll want to address the biggest problem that they have with the Slack group, which is moderation. So I'll use the AI to flag posts that may be breaking the community rules, but not today. Today is just for the MVP. So enough talk, I better get moving. So first I'm going to clone the starter kit into a new project. Now the starter kit is nothing too fancy. What I've done is I've just collected a couple of pages and components that I've been finding I could reuse throughout different projects. So for example, I have a few auth fields here for authentication. I use Firebase authentication with FlutterFlow. You have the normal login screen here with some of the social buttons kind of wired up already. I've also got a registration page. In this case, I actually use a page view because I think it's really nice to have a little onboarding message before you go to register for an account, understand what the app is for, if you're in the right place. And so when the user clicks this Get Started button, they'll move on to the next page of the page view and have their choices as to whether they want to sign up with Google or sign up with email or head back to the login page. Then I also have a sort of normal account page. Again, there's nothing fancy here. I've got the avatar photo, I've got to have the display name, the email, and then a profile page where you can change your display name, change your profile photo, you can add a little bio if you want to, and of course you need to have a delete account button, which is necessary for any mobile app. There's also password reset, and there's actions in FlutterFlow, of course, for all of these things, so it's not that complicated to be setting up these fields, and then you can spin up an app really quickly and then just modify these components as opposed to creating them from scratch. One thing that's often missing as well is the verified email check. So if you're going to allow your users to sign up with email and password, you really should set up a verified email check as well, just for extra security so people aren't setting up accounts really quickly, or it's actually possible for bots to set up accounts because they could directly be using your Firebase APIs. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. And the verify email address check is just an added layer of security. I also have a notifications bell that just sets up a badge for if you have new notifications that'll go into whatever app bar I want to put them into. And an empty list widget is also useful. It's very basic. It's just a message that you pass in as a parameter. And of course, as the project goes on, I can modify these things. That's the advantage of having them here rather than setting them up as a library. And then the initial page, it's just going to be a blank page, but it's also going to have the button that'll take you to the settings page, and the notifications bell that'll take you to the notifications history. The notifications history is just a list of your past notifications. This is actually something that's not talked about a lot in FlutterFlow, because the way that notifications are set up in FlutterFlow actually doesn't allow for this out of the box. But it's something you'll see in basically every app, so I want to include it here, and I'm going to talk a bit more about it later as well. Okay, first I'm going to go and set up my project. I did have a bit of a think about what I'm going to call this application. In the end, I just settled on something very simple. Since we're going to be basing the app around Las Palmas, I'll just call it Palmas. That's the Spanish word for palm tree. And here I'm going to create the package name. This is the bundle ID, and it's just going to be usually .com, .something, .something. That's the convention. For me, it can just be .com, .keely, .palmas. Cool, now I'm going to go ahead and set up Firebase. It's completely fine to connect up a project ID, but things really do get simpler if you let FlutterFlow create the Firebase project for you. I'm in Europe, so I'll go for the Europe, and let's sign in. Okay, fantastic. I've got my project created, so I'm going to head over to Firebase now and turn a couple of things on. First, I have to go and upgrade the project so I can use cloud functions and storage. Cool, and then I'm going to go and head over to authentication and turn on my authentication providers. I'm going to go with email password. I'm also going to go with Google. And I will also go with Apple. Next, I'll go to storage and turn that on. And by the way, when I go to authentication, there is one other thing that I need to do. I need to add in a particular domain that will allow the run mode in FlutterFlow to work. You'll get this from the documentation. It's ffdebug service, front end, and so on and so forth. That will allow sign in with Google to work in my preview mode in FlutterFlow. Great, back to FlutterFlow, and I'll start deploying a few things. I'll deploy Firebase storage. I'm also going to turn on Crashlytics. And then making sure that my bundle ID is set up properly, Keely Palmas, I'm going to generate the config files. Great, now the config files have a very important job. If I go to project settings, these apps here need to get created by the config files. So if I do a refresh on Firebase, I should see those applications now appear. One for Android, one for iOS, and one for the web. Before I head back to FlutterFlow, I'm just going to go to Cloud Firestore and make sure that it's turned on and set up. Yep, there it is. So now back to FlutterFlow, and we're going to set up Firebase. So I've got my users collection here already. FlutterFlow has set it up for me. That's one of the advantages of creating the project via FlutterFlow rather than linking an existing project. It all tends to work a bit more seamlessly. But it is super important to make sure that this users collection is set to users and turned on. And I can head down here and just hit all of these buttons, and hopefully they'll deploy. Great, now let's turn on push notifications. Now, there is something quite novel that I do with my FlutterFlow projects, and that's to use Supabase and Firebase together. The push notifications that I just deployed won't work without Firestore and Firebase auth, but Supabase won't authenticate without Supabase auth. So what I have in my template is this cloud function, and inside of this cloud function, it imports a package called JSON Web Token. And what that does is it helps me to mint a Supabase token. And you can't do this. Supabase will give you a particular JWT secret in their dashboard, and you can use JavaScript and this library, JSON Web Token, to generate the JWT, and you can send that with your Supabase requests. So first I'm going to hit deploy on this cloud function, and then I'll head over to the custom code that uses it. My code is called update Supabase token. I just have all of this in the template, and what it does is it uses user changes from the Firebase auth library to do something whenever the user token changes in Firebase auth. So for example, if there's a refresh event, or if a user logs in, or even just when the user opens the app, they'll get a new Firebase token. And then the code will set a Supabase token using the Firebase token, and it will mint a new Supabase token using the cloud function that I just deployed. So I just need to hit verify for this custom action. Right, so I've made a totally new project now in Supabase. I've called it Palmas. It's a completely empty database. The first thing I'm going to want to do is go to project settings and get some of my credentials. I'll go to API and I'll grab some of the project API keys that I can paste into FlutterFlow. Down to Supabase. And I'll paste in the anon key. And then I'll grab the URL. And the next thing that I want to grab is actually the JWT secret. Now, the reason I need the JWT secret is because I actually have this cloud function. And what it's doing, as I said, is it's minting Supabase tokens. And the way that it does that is by signing them with this Supabase JWT secret that I just copied. So to set this environment variable, I actually have to go to GCP. And FlutterFlow has created the add FCM token on user delete and send push notifications trigger. What I did was I deployed mint Supabase token. Mint Supabase token needs this environment variable, so I'm going to set it here. I'm going to go to runtime, build, connections, and security, and pop in a new variable. And this is the JWT secret that I've copied from Supabase. And then it's just going to be Supabase JWT secret is the name of the environment variable. And that's good. Now all I have to do is hit next and deploy the cloud function again. Now there's a few app assets that I'll need, such as logos and style fundamentals. For creating a logo, there's various tools on the market, a lot of AI tools for this. The one that I currently like is Canva. Let's face it, it can be easy to get lost in this a little bit. At this stage, I very much urge trying to move quickly and just grabbing something, even if it's not perfect. So this is the logo that I've gone for with Palmas. Nothing fancy, but I can always tweak it later. And then for the color palette, I really like this one, Coolers. It's totally free, I don't even have an account, and you basically just press spacebar and it will give you complementary colors. And this one seems nice for a primary color, sea green, so let's grab that. Back in FlutterFlow, I do have a couple of things set up already, especially theme widgets. Now, I don't have many of these, but things like buttons and form fields, even icon buttons or ghost buttons. It's really important to have good practices around theme widgets and design systems. And you'll understand why this is as your project gets more complex. So at first, my primary was this kind of blue. I'm going to change it over now to this sea green. And also let's switch up the secondary color. So I can actually lock things in coolers and then I can just make other complementary colors around it. So maybe for secondary, I'll take this guy picked on blue. And again, of course, you can change these as you go along. And when you change them here, you'll change them throughout your project. So now my theme widgets are reflecting this green primary color instead. You can also, of course, set typography and icons. I'll leave things as they are for now, but again, I can just change these at any time. Okay, now I'm going to go over and set up my icons in app assets. So I'll use a transparent image for the splash screen. And I can minimize the fit. I think I'll actually make it a bit smaller though. I think it's probably fine to just call it 200 pixels. And I'll upload the launcher icon as well. This one can't be transparent, it needs to have a background. That's the one that'll appear on the mobile app home screen. I also have one more image that I'm going to use for the registration page. And that's just a picture of Las Palmas itself. In fact, I'll throw that into the UI now. So I'll head over to the registration page, into the page view, grab the image, and I can set this as an asset. At this point, you might think, wow, that was a lot of setting up. Can we start building in the UI yet? Nope. Now, as I said, I've been developing various bits of boilerplate as I've gone along. And one of those bits of boilerplate is to set up things in Supabase. There are just some things that I like to do with each project that I create. One of those things is to set up admin privileges so that I can make use of role-based access control. This allows me to build admin panels and do various other things that an admin user might want to do. Also, every app needs compliance. It needs a privacy policy, it needs terms of service. And so I've just set this up as a table so that I can edit on the fly and have these things accessible, for example, to people who are maybe not as technical. So I set up the app compliance table. I also set up the RLS, row level security policies for it. And then I set up my users table. Now, this is really important because the method that I'm using works with both Firebase auth and Supabase. But the thing is, the whole point of a relational database is that you're going to want to relate data to each other. You're going to want to join tables together. And one of the most commonly joined tables is the users table. Thing is, if you're using Supabase auth, you will have a users table for sure in the authentication section. But if you want to extend that users table to give users custom fields, like for example, the notification preferences for a user, you'd want to put that on the user model, but you actually have to extend the user's model anyway. So it becomes necessary to create a users table in Supabase. I'm doing the same thing here, but actually instead of using Supabase auth, I'm using Firebase auth. And so the IDs, instead of being an integer, are actually going to be a text field. And the reason for that is so that they can match the text field, which comes out of Firebase auth. This way, in FlutterFlow, you can still use the authenticated user and user ID because it will match the one in Supabase. Then I set up the ORLS policies for the users so that users can manage things like their profile photos, but they can't mess around with anything like an isAdmin flag or an isPro flag. Then I also set up notifications because I want to have things like notification histories, read receipts. It's not enough to just send the notification and have no record of it. And then authentication policies so users can say set their isRead flag, or they can delete their own notification if they want to. So what I'll do is I'll copy this whole thing and I'm going to paste it into the Supabase SQL editor right here. So with that one copy paste, I've now created a whole bunch of tables for app compliance, notifications, and I also have row level security policies set up already for these tables. Now I just need to head back to Supabase in FlutterFlow and get this new schema. And then we should be ready to run the preview mode. And actually, every time I use the preview mode, I tend to open the browser console as well, especially the network tab. Because this shows me what FlutterFlow is doing under the hood, and especially it shows me about API calls and it shows me Supabase calls. That really helps me tell what's going on and make sure that all of my cloud functions and all of my code is working as it should. Okay, let's go for get started, and I'll try to sign up with Google. Perfect, and I still just have a blank app, but I also have this notification screen, and I have this settings page where I can edit my profile. I've also included these fine print terms of use and privacy policy screens. I'll get into these in a minute. Obviously, they're not set up yet. And now, crucially, because I've made a Firebase auth account, I want to make sure that it's mimicked in the users table in Supabase. And there it is. This is actually the Firebase auth ID. But I can now use this Supabase users record to join into other Supabase tables. I only have the skeleton of my application built, but all the same, I want to go to the Apple developer account and create a testflight distribution. So I need to make an identifier. I'll give it the bundle ID. I'll call it Palmas. And then I need to search for push notifications because I need push. And I also need sign in with Apple. So we'll set both of those up and go for continue. Register. I also need a similar one. And this is the same. It's an app, but it actually just has to be the bundle ID and then .image notification. And then the name of it is going to be image notification, and I don't need to do anything else. I also need keys, but I've actually set up keys before, so I'm going to use some of the keys from my older applications. But I do need to create a new application, so let's create a new app. So I'll set it to iOS, give it the name, the language, the bundle ID that I set up in the Apple developer account. SKU can be the bundle ID, and we'll create the app. Now, under app information, I need to grab the Apple ID, and I'm going to paste that into the app ID column here in mobile deployment. I'll give this a version of 0.0.1. Generally with semantic versioning, little bug fixes and things are the last number, then minor versions, then major versions. It could be that when your app is fully ready to deploy, you would go to version 1, but that's up to you. I also need to grab my issuer ID from App Store Connect and also one of my API keys so I can set these in. I'd also like it if push notifications worked, so I'm going to grab one of my keys from the certificates, identifiers, and profiles page. And I'll upload that here in Firebase under Cloud Messaging. Good, and now that I've done that, I actually need to regenerate the configuration files for Firebase to take effect of that change. Good, and now I can go ahead and deploy to the App Store. Now, while that's deploying, I'm going to move on to setting up my API.